Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. In this video, we're going to be reviewing GPD's latest handheld, their GPD Win Mini 2024 edition. As far as performance is concerned, there really isn't that big of a difference between this version and the previous 2023 version, which is running AMD 7840U and AMD 7640U, depending on whatever configuration you bought. This is likewise using the same rebadge stuff, which is the 8840U or the 8640U. They come in a few different configurations, so you can get different storage sizes, going down to 512 gig up to 2 terabyte. And there's also different memory configurations, 16, 32, and I believe 64. So depending on whatever type of configuration you want, that is going to dictate how much the price is going to be. The 512 gig storage and 16 gig RAM version is really going to be the cheapest version, and they're really trying to get the price in line with a lot of the other handhelds that are out there in terms of their launch price. The Asus RG Ally is available for far cheaper now, so it's really going to start distancing itself from that price-wise, but that is going to be the only way that you're going to get this as a cheap price, because literally there is no other device that has the 8840U or the 7840U in this small of a form factor. There's just nothing else like it, and this is again, one of the things why I really love what GPD does. They do a lot of great things. Now, when GPD first sent me the sample of this, they had made a metal version of this, and I couldn't recommend it because of how the thermals were on the device. That is no longer a concern, especially with the display on this device being a VRR display. It is very similar to the Asus RG Ally's display, so it is a 1080p 120Hz screen, but it does have VRR, and it is native landscape. This is absolutely huge for a lot of reasons, mostly because for the everyday user who doesn't really want to be bothered with whatever's going to be happening on the Windows gaming PC side, that they don't want to muck around with things that happen on a native portrait display. So very quickly, this is something that I often show is Abe's Odyssey. The PC version just won't run. We have to wrap the older game that was using direct draw. We have to do it in something of a modern API that is not going to fail on us when using a native portrait display. So while you can fix those things, there are some other oddities, like AMD's overlay will be tilted when it shows up. And there's stuff that is just kind of annoying on native portrait displays. So the fact that we're using a native landscape display that is VRR, EDP, 1080p, 120 Hz, really, it's awesome. Not only that, it is better for motion clarity compared to the previous version. So we're going to be going through a bit of a bigger comparison between the two displays. The 2023 version of the GPD Win Mini does have better image quality insofar, also in viewing angles, and so far as I can capture that, and even using my eyes to look at that. But overall image quality, motion clarity, and VRR are far, far more important to me than slightly better image quality. Now, for those people that already have a GPD Win Mini 2023 edition, I can't really recommend upgrading to this. There is not enough there. If you already have that device, that I can say, yeah, you should go get it. If you've been on the fence and have been looking at the GPD Win Mini, I can very much recommend the GPD Win Mini 2024 edition. We're going to get into it. Up first, we're going to be taking a look at the display side of things, and we'll be comparing them between both versions, but I'm going to really hammer home how big of a difference that motion clarity is, so we'll get into that right now. All right, I've gone ahead and tried to establish how these panels look. So on the right-hand side, this is the older panel. This is the 2023 that is non-VRR, and this is the 2024 panel that does have VRR. And I've tweaked my exposure rating a bit and my white balance just to kind of convey as best I can how these look in real life and how they compare in real life. And it should be notable that on the older panel that it is far more pronounced with in terms of its luminosity. It is a far brighter panel. But 100%, if I were to put these side by side, just visually, without even saying anything, people will say that this side is far punchier. It definitely has far more pop than the VRR panel has. Going through some additional testing here, again, this is the 2023 model, this is the 2024 model, so VRR is over here, and the older panel is right here. And it may not seem like it's easy to tell here. Again, I do prefer this one, so I'm going to go ahead and just change the white balance here just so that you can kind of have a better idea of how the gradient scales. And you can see that on the 2023 panel that it has a far better and cleaner look here, whereas on the VRR panel we have this kind of blowing out part right here. The ultimate comparison here between these is this panel is definitely warmer. Not saying that you can't do some color correction to fix a bunch of things, but by default for both of these units, both of these are at max brightness right now. You can see if we mess with the color balance in the background on my camera, how things change and shift. So no matter which way we do, if we do cold or warm based on my color balance on my camera, you can see how the color shift looks far more pleasing on the older model versus the VRR panel. And I think this is a better idea to try to convey what's going on where there is less
accuracy, I guess you could say, on the VRR panel as opposed to the older MIPI panel that was on the Win Mini. In this test, we're going to take a look at the viewing angles compared between them. And this is, again, very difficult to try to solve. You can see that, at least from my viewfinder, it looks like that circle is getting smaller when we twist the angle to take a look at it at an angle. And as we come back to straight on, you can see that the circle gets larger. So right about, you can see the circle starting to get a little bit smaller, and it's going smaller and smaller as we go on. So what's interesting is when I do this on the camera itself, there's a visible circle that kind of shrinks as I tilt it. And as far as I can tell with my eye, it looks like the circle kind of just almost fades and gets blurrier at the edges. So the MIPI panel does indeed have better viewing angles insofar as this test and when I look at it, but I wouldn't say it's like that big of a difference. But clearly I'm capturing a difference. And then the last test between the two is the motion clarity test. So this is going to be testing the response time of the panels themselves, and VRR and the response time of the VRR panel. So this one in this particular video on the left-hand side, it is very, very evident that the response time and motion clarity is far better on the VRR panel. Even when I bring in high frame rate video, it becomes even more pronounced to see the difference between the two. So it's not something that you need high frame rate video to actually see the difference. Comparing them side by side, it is self-evident which one has better motion clarity, and the VRR panel does indeed have that. And last but not least, and this is something that I often talk about, but a lot of people may not appreciate all that much unless it actually impacts them. I always use Abe's Odyssey just because it's an instant test that I can do and I can download it alarmingly fast. Red Dead Redemption 2 is also going to be a game that gives us a problem. So you can see I went ahead and I tried to play Abe's Odyssey here and it just crashed out. Let me go ahead and lower the brightness on this so we can read what it says. So he says, can't set mode, go pound salt, you won't play Abe's Odyssey on PC today. So there it goes, it just crashed out. I'll go ahead and raise the brightness a bit. But if we go ahead on our native landscape panel, which is on the 2024 GPD Win Mini, again, I haven't modified any files whatsoever, it just plays. So this is something that native landscape panels are superior for gaming handhelds. You can also see that the AMD software isn't tilted and upside down, which happens on the GPD Win Mini as well. Anything that has native portrait is going to be showing up like that. So that is another reason why the 2024 edition is a better fit if you did not already own the Win Mini, and why I would ultimately recommend the 2024.
Hopefully I've made it very clear to you that while image quality and viewing angles are better on the 2023 version, VRR, motion clarity, and a native landscape panel that is EDP on the 2024 version is far superior overall from a user experience standpoint, just using Windows Gaming PC as a baseline standpoint. And also it allows us to just kind of set and forget TDP. So I've been kind of rocking 10 watt, 11 watt TDP quite often just to get better battery life, and thermals are absolutely perfect inside of that threshold. I have been playing at 15 watt. There's a bunch of game demos that I'm going to be showing you throughout this video, and every one of them are pretty much going to be running at 15 watt. And I played them for like an hour or two at each game. And generally speaking, we're going to be getting into it later on when we take a look at the benchmarks of this on why 15 watt is a sweet spot for this particular device and why you really don't want to be pushing anymore. However, battery life will suffer. So we'll be talking about battery life and thermals right now, and then we'll get into the benchmarks of this. So up first, let's start talking about thermals, because there's a bit to unpack and understand with what's going on with temperature. Now, I want you to kind of think about it. You know when like you're watching a weather channel and they'll say that it's like 20 degrees outside, but with wind chill, it feels like 8. That is what we're talking about here. When you had a metal chassis, the amount of heat that was sitting on that platform and was just distributing into how it was being felt onto my hands was untenable. But since it has moved to a glass and fiber blend, you can literally see that when I touch any hot part of the plastic, that all of the heat basically just evaporates, it vanishes. And that is what I really want to kind of convey to you, is that there's more to temperatures and stuff and how thermals feel other than just direct temperature readings, because how the thermal transference and how it goes onto the fingers and how it feels is completely different than just looking at how hot something is. So it's really critically important that when I tell you that the temperatures have been fixed, also the 2023 model, they have been fixed. Now, obviously, if you go to 20 watt, you're going to feel warmth. It's not going to get hot like the metal version did, but you will feel warmth. Going at 10 watt, I don't feel warmth at all. Even up to 13 watt, I really don't feel anything even at lengths of time. So 13 watt really is still the ceiling of where I would go to in terms of how much TDP you put into, generally speaking. And I really care more about that from the battery life perspective more than I care about it from a thermal perspective. But even going on, even if we were to drill this device at 20 watt, temperature-wise, the internal chip doesn't get very hot at all. We are always under 65 degrees Celsius at length. So if you were worried about the temperatures of the device itself, there is literally nothing to worry about. It doesn't get hot enough. Even at 20 watt, at load, at lengths of time, we're never going to get over 65 degrees Celsius. So just be mindful of that when I talk about thermals, I talk about how it feels. And when we think about how the internal heat of the device is, you're never going to be anywhere in the area of where you have to be worried about thermal throttling the device. It's not going to happen, especially where the caps are by default on this device. Naturally, talking on thermals, I should take a quick aside and talk about fan noise. Now, this is something that I don't like to bring up all that often in my reviews, only because people want to get in the weeds and like, oh, well, how is the sound quality of the fan? And typically, I've learned after talking with a lot of different people that all of this doesn't matter, and it gets reduced down to, can you hear the fan, yes or no? It's a binary answer. And the answer is, at 10 watt, no, I really can't hear it all that much. It's fairly whisper. I can easily mute it. Anything over 10 watt, yes, I can start to hear the fan. At 15 and 20 watt, easily hear the fan. So if you are thinking about, getting this device and you have a partner that is very sensitive to fan noise, in any degree, they're going to care about this. So if you're looking at this, especially when we take a look at the benchmarks, take a look at the 10 watt scope, because that's where you're going to be playing to make sure that the device is inaudible. Not to mention also that you're going to get much better battery life playing at 10 watt. And because of the VRR display on the device, it's going to help sort out all those frames for you nicely. And how smooth it is such a big benefit on this display. And since I'm talking about battery life now, what kind of battery life can you expect out of the GPD Win Mini? So when we take a look at this, you can go to the very extreme end at very low wattage. So we can run games at like 2.5 watt, 3 watt. So a lot of indie 2D games, a lot of 2D games, even emulation of like PlayStation 1, even at like 5x resolution, like an internal resolution scale, we can run these games at like 3 and 4 watt. So if we're running Celeste, this game is a 2D indie game. It runs 60 FPS, no problem, inside of 2.5 watts. When we run this game at 2.5 watts, when we take a look at that and graph it out, we're actually getting somewhere close to around 7.5 hours of battery life. This is excellent battery life, but it should be excellent battery life because we're not really taxing the system all that much. But it gives you a better picture of where we should be in this scope. On the other side of the extreme, when we push it up to 20 watt, this is an extreme amount of power that we're putting in such a small device. And you're going to get somewhere close to about an hour and 15 minutes of battery life on the device when you push it at 20 watt. So don't anticipate all that much battery life. It's a 44 watt hour battery. So it's still a sizable battery. It's about 10% larger capacity than the original SteamDeck. The newer SteamDeck OLED's a 50 watt hour battery. So the SteamDeck OLED has a bigger battery, but it's still a sizable battery for how small the device is overall. So if you were the type of person that was like very, is that a handheld? I know that there's a lot of people out there. The GPD Win Mini is practically the only gaming PC that fits into the scope of being a true handheld insofar as how small it is. To wrap it up, the type of battery life that you're going to be expecting here, again, depending on you and what type of games you're going to be playing and how you're going to finesse the system a little bit, you're going to be looking at a top end of getting around 7.5 hours of battery life, all the way down to about an hour and 15 minutes of battery life. So still very good battery life, considering, especially because it's such a sensationally small handheld, and being able to burst up and get really good performance when you need it. Now, again, I would suggest not going up to 20 watt and instead do 15 watt, which is going to get you closer to like an hour and 40 minutes of battery life. That 30 extra minutes is actually a big boon. And when we get to the benchmarks, in just a second, you're going to see going up to 20 watt doesn't really pay off a lot of times. Before we get into the meat and potato parts of the benchmark, I wanted to give you a little bit of synthetic benchmarks. So we're going to take a look at how performance scales across every TDP with different memory settings. So I'm going to set the system to 6400 megatransfers and 7500 megatransfers. If we take a look at the CPU benchmark first with the synthetic benchmark, I'm running Heaven at 720p, all low settings. This is a very CPU-bound test. And when I run this particular test, we're going to be leaning more on the CPU, especially as we put more power into it, because we're going to be hitting higher and higher frame rates, which are going to be very CPU-bound. And when we take a look at this, only 6400 megatransfers wins out at very, very early on. Almost like 5 and 6 watt does it actually win in a CPU-bound test. Going past that, 7500 megatransfers wins pretty consistently across the board. When we switch it up and go to the GPU bound side, things change a little bit. We actually still win at 6400 megatransfers up to about 10 watt, 10 and 11 watt. We're actually still largely winning from a GPU perspective, that forcing a lower clock rate on the RAM is beneficial at lower TDPs. This makes sense because of how the memory controller is going to be tied with the clock rate of the RAM. As we start pushing more power into the system, that gulf is going to widen, and we're going to get far more performance going to 7500 megatransfers. So largely, it's going to be up to you on what you think you're going to be playing. Ultimately, I would probably suggest just going to 7500 megatransfers. Generally speaking, I found that to be overall better most of the time. However, if you plan on only using extreme low TDPs on this device, it would be recommendable to go to 6400 megatransfers and maybe even lower. That's going to be for you to take a look at, but that's giving you a basic understanding of looking at how TDP scales at every watt at those two different settings from a CPU and GPU bound synthetic benchmark. Let's go ahead and get into gaming benchmarks right now.
All right, now let's start taking a look at the benchmarks. There's a few things that we need to explain here. I am changing things up a little bit just to make them a little bit more concise and hopefully a little bit clearer. We are looking at the median FPS and no longer the average FPS. And I also got rid of the 0.1 percentile FPS chart. So it's just the median FPS and the 1 percentile. If this is something that you like, let me know. If you'd rather I went back to the old type of schema, which is average 1% and 0.1 percentile, let me know in the comment section if that's what you prefer. Before we start taking a look at the benchmarks, quickly I want to tell you about my methodology that I used on the system. Now, obviously, I'm running the GPD Win Mini, the 2024 edition, so this is using AMD's 8840U. My settings that I'm using on Windows, I am using a pretty advanced power saving mode, so I am setting EPP mode to 100. This means that whatever power is available to the system, as much as possible that I can, I'm trying to limit how much can go to the CPU, which leaves more power to go to the GPU part of the package. Additionally, I have disabled memory isolation. This will also increase performance a bit at the detriment of some security. So this is something that for a handheld, I don't really care if it's disabled. Additionally, Windows game mode is off. I am running the latest version of Windows 11 and I'm running the latest available AMD Radeon driver that I had available to me, which was the 24.3.1 drivers. That is the methodology that I'm using. Up first, we're going to be taking a look at Batman Arkham Knight 720p max settings with no Nvidia Gameworks. All right, up first, looking at our 10 watt TDP slice, we're looking at 51.5 on our median FPS and 36.9 on our 1 percentile. Going up to 15 watt, we see a really healthy boost. We're looking at 79.3 on our median FPS and 48.7 on our 1 percentile. Going up to 20 watt, we're looking at 83.2 on our median FPS and 51.6 on our 1 percentile. This is kind of what you should anticipate. Going from 15 watt to 20 watt isn't really going to be a gigantic boost like we're seeing from 10 watt to 15 watt. Additionally, doing 20 watt TDP really isn't recommended, especially because, like I talked about earlier on this video, battery life wise, running at 20 watt, you're looking at less than an hour and a half of battery life. At 15 watt, you're going to be close to 2 hours, but still under 2 hours. At 10 watt TDP, you're going to be closer to 3 hours of battery life. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these particular graphs. Let's go into the next game. The next game we're going to be taking a look at, and this is new to my benchmark suite, this is the Callisto protocol. I'm running at 720p. TAA is enabled, and I am using low settings. This is a rather newer Unreal Engine game, and it is very, very taxing, which is why I wanted to include it. At our 10 watt TDP, this is really not in any way playable. I'm just including it here just so that we have a kind of a consistent base, especially as newer devices come out. It'd be interesting to see how much better things get. At 10 watt TDP, we're looking at 31.5 on our median FPS, and our 1 percentile is 12.6 FPS. At 15 watt, we're getting somewhere where it's actually starting to be playable. Our median is 60.1 FPS, and our 1 percentile is 22 FPS. This is still not absolutely great, but even going to 20 watt, it doesn't get all that much better. I would still recommend heavily with this type of game, even though as heavy as it is, I wouldn't really go much further than 15 watt. Okay, the next game we're going to be taking a look at is Cyberpunk 2077. I am running 720p with the SteamDeck preset and no upscaling. The reason that I want to do 720p native is just because all upscaling tech is being developed in real time, and if I were to look at older benchmarks, if I wasn't using native resolution, it could get a little bit muddy when we're taking a look at like FSR 2.1 or 2.2 or 2.3. So I chose to typically I'm trying to run without TAA number one, and I'm also trying not to run without any upscaling whatsoever. So where I can, if the game is possible to run without any upscaling, I do, which is why we have this here. So at 10 watt TDP, our median FPS is 22.9 FPS, and our 1 percentile is 17.1. Not really good enough for these particular settings. If you wanted to run at 10 watt TDP, it would be advisable to use upscaling. If we go to 15 watt, this is where the game largely becomes playable. We are looking at our median FPS at 42.6 FPS and our 1 percentile is 30.4. At 20 watt, we get a pretty healthy boost. We're looking at a 16% boost on our median FPS at 49.7 FPS, and our 1 percentile is 37.5, which is, again, another healthy boost at around 23%. The next game on our list is Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. I am using the DirectX 11 backend with the Ultra preset. This is a very DirectX 11 hard game. This is the last set of DirectX 11 games from like AAA type of development that didn't have any type of resolution scaling options whatsoever. There was also Assassin's Creed Odyssey? Origins? I believe it's Origins. That is another DirectX 11 hard game. At our 10 watt TDP slice, we're looking at 21.2 on our median FPS, and our 1 percentile is 15.5 FPS. At 15 watt, this is where it's that sweet spot again. We're looking at having a 39 FPS on our median FPS and 29.5 on our 1 percentile. This is very playable at 30 FPS within those limits. And then up to 20 watt, we get a pretty healthy boost, around a 16% boost, 17% boost on our median FPS, and again a 17% boost on our 1 percentile. So that's what it looks like for Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. Right, the next game we're looking at is Horizon Zero Dawn. Again, I'm running at 720p with the Favor Performance preset and no upscaling. At a 10 watt TDP, we're actually pretty playable with these particular settings. So we're looking at 37.9 on our median FPS and 29.2 on our 1 percentile. Completely playable within these settings for at 10 watt TDP. So a little bit south of 3 hours of playtime. Moving right along to our 15 watt TDP slice, we get a very healthy boost at 85% boost from going up 5 watts. So that's rather tremendous. So we're looking at 70.4 FPS on our median FPS and 50.7 on our 1 percentile. This is going to make the game play outrageously great. And if we go up to 20 FPS, you're going to feel like this is going to be the best for a handheld. However, I would really caution against using this just because battery life is going to be not great. And running 20 watt in a handheld state without how it being so small, you will start to feel that heat. At 15 watt, it's really not terrible. At 10 watt, it's not noticeable at all, which is again why I typically prefer going to 10 watt. Let's take a look at our next game. Okay, up next, we're going to be taking a look at Returnal. Now, the settings I'm using is 720p. However, I am using FSR2 balanced with low settings, which means that it's using a sub-resolution of 720p and then upscaling to 720p. This is absolutely necessary for Returnal because it's brutal on GPUs, and the 780M, even when pushing a lot of power to it, is still not the best GPU for this particular game. At 10 watt TDP, we can take a look at our median FPS is 23.5 FPS, and our 1 percentile is 14.7, completely unplayable. At 15 watt, however, things get to a playable state here. We're looking at a 40.5 median FPS and 25.8 on our 1 percentile. This is a 73% increase on our median and a 75% increase on our 1 percentile. Going to 20 watt, however, really isn't worth it, and this is where we're going to start seeing massive diminishing returns. It's just a very GPU demanding game. CPU really isn't going to help us at all here, so this is what we're looking at. This is a game that is completely playable now. It seems to have gotten better as time has gone on for Returnal, but at 15 watt TDP, completely playable with these particular settings that I have here for Returnal. And the last game that we're going to be taking a look at is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I am running the DirectX 11 backend. I am using the lowest setting preset with no AA and no upscaling. Obviously, changing these will improve performance a bit, but this is what I'm getting. At 10 watt TDP, we're looking at 46.3 median FPS, and our 1 percentile is 38.4. This is completely playable within 10 watt with these particular settings. If we take a look at 15 watt, we get a pretty healthy boost, about 60% boost on our median FPS to 74.3 FPS, and our 1 percentile gets a 58% boost to 60.5. This is extremely playable within 15 watt. You're going to have a really good time playing with these particular settings. Going up to 20 watt isn't a sensational difference. We're looking at a 20% increase in performance on our median FPS and also for our 1 percentile. At this particular frame rate, obviously the screen on the GPD One Mini goes up to 120 FPS. So if you really wanted to, especially with specific types of FSR, you can go up there. You're just going to be paying the penalty for how much your power you're putting in the system. I really wouldn't recommend it. Generally speaking, I think you're going to be better off with 13 watt Hopefully Shadow of the Tomb Raider gets FSR3, especially as FSR3 starts rolling around. Shadow of the Tomb Raider has been pretty good with getting updates with different upscalers, so that is hopeful that we see that in the future. And that's it for the benchmarks for this particular video.
A few other things I think that is worth mentioning in this review is that all of GPD's Windows gaming PC handhelds have always had this little switch here, and you could switch the controls on the device to either go into what would effectively be an Xbox 360 controller. As far as the operating system is concerned, you plugged in a USB Xbox 360 controller. You could also switch it over to mouse mode. And in mouse mode, you can actually do a few bit things more. GPD offers a tool they call Win Controls, and what you can do is you can actually specify that any of the buttons that are on this device, like the D-pad and these face buttons, you can change these to be whatever you want. So if you wanted this to be WASD, you can make the analog stick WASD, WASD. You can make these cursor keys, these keys down here. And the reason that I bring that up is like if you wanted to play older PC games, you can map keyboard keys to the face buttons very easily without having to use any other third-party software, just by going in the mouse mode and specifying whatever Win controls you want. So I'll have this be like Z, X, and W so that that can translate over into a gamepad for mouse mode in older PC games, which I think is a really cool thing that many people may not be aware of, but it's something that I absolutely love about GPD's devices. Specifically to those people that have already purchased a GPD Win Mini, I can't recommend this device for you to upgrade. There isn't enough here. Performance-wise, it's exactly the same. There's nothing to write home about. I wouldn't bother. The only big change here that we have is the display, in my opinion, is superior to the older version. However, you do lose Oculink. So you're kind of one hand in the other, like 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. I don't know which situation is better for you. You have better image quality, better viewing angles on the 2020 version. However, you have better motion clarity and VRR and a native landscape display on this version. Is that worth upgrading? Is it worth paying all that money just to get a landscape display to get the display? I don't think so. For people that don't have a GPD Win Mini and have been looking at it for a while, I can very much recommend the GPD Win Mini 2024 edition. This is something that everyone is going to absolutely love because there's nothing that you need to worry about. Things just work because it has that native landscape display. And because of VRR, you can kind of just set a low TDP and just kind of walk away from it. Just load up and run anything and just accept whatever it gives you and just play games. Ultimately, how I think I'm going to end this review is that the GPD Win Mini 2024 edition is a culmination of like 8 years that GPD has been making Windows gaming PCs, and they have made faults along those ways, but this is a culmination of work where they finally have a position where all of the parts have finally aligned, and we got into a place where this is finally a handheld, pocketable Windows gaming PC that the masses could use and just use and have fun with it. And it's come a long way because this is the GPD Win 3 that I wish we would always have, because the GPD Win 2 was a device that had a lot of quirks, but this was the only gaming PC, Windows gaming PC that we had at the time. But now we have so many different choices, but I finally feel that this is something that is instantly recommendable. Thank you very much to my Patreon members, and thank you very much to my YouTube channel members. I hope this video was informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.